So if you have a pulse and keep up with anime in even the most remote of senses, you'll probably know that the Shibuya incident is right around the corner. Now, the Shibuya incident, or the Shibuya arc, for those of you who somehow haven't heard of it, is an arc within JJK. In fact, it's JJK's largest arc, spanning over 50 chapters from roughly chapter 80 to roughly chapter 130. Now, this is the arc that happens directly after Hidden Inventory / Premature Death. That is to say, this is the first arc that we get back into after our step into the past with Gojo and Geto. Now, I'm sure you've seen a lot of TikToks or shorts or reels about people being like,
"Oh, the anime fan base isn't ready for the Shibuya incident,"
and so on and so forth. And to a large degree, they're probably not wrong. The Shibuya incident is brutal. And if anime is a safe space for you where you get to enjoy your favorite characters living their best lives, then I don't know, maybe drop after Hidden Inventory. But not only is the Shibuya incident dark, dreary, and a borderline painful read at certain points, in the best way possible, of course, it's a very good arc, it's also kind of complicated. See, the Shibuya arc truly signals JJK becoming one of the more complicated manga out there, as not only is basically every single important character in the entire manga involved in this arc, but they all also have individual fights. And in these fights, new domain expansions and rules and techniques all get introduced at breakneck speed. So much so that a lot of people who have read the Shibuya arc have had to reread it multiple times. Yours truly very much included. In fact, I literally just reread it to make this video. And thus today, instead of focusing on,
"Oh, how the anime community isn't ready for the Shibuya arc,"
I more want to focus on getting you, the anime fan base, ready for the Shibuya arc. Now, this isn't going to be me trying to prepare you for the loss of many characters and the overall evil that is this arc. In fact, we're not going to talk about that at all. Today, I just want to introduce you to some of the key players that are going to be introduced during the Shibuya arc, what their abilities are, what their backstories are, and how they play into the greater fold of the JJK storyline. In essence, today, in a spoiler-free way, I want to get you prepared for JJK's longest and most important arc. That way, you can process the emotions of the arc without worrying about why things are happening, or how things are happening. Which is why today we're talking everything that you need to know before the Shibuya incident. But before we get to explaining complicated power systems or unpacking emotional trauma thrusted onto us by literature, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you like the idea of me talking about JJK, I'm going to be doing it every single week on my anime podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So if you want a week-by-week reaction to this week's episode of JJK, that's the place. So the Shibuya incident, or the Shibuya arc, a 55-ish chapter long arc in the manga that all of the manga readers are telling you soft and supple anime only people to beware of. And listen, in actuality, is this arc pretty brutal? Absolutely. And sure, did manga readers have to go through the emotional roller coaster that was this arc years ago? Absolutely. But that doesn't mean that anime-only people won't be able to comprehend the levels of emotion. I've read the manga, at least however much there is currently of it, 4 to 5 times. I can tell you right now, I'll probably be just as affected by the anime as anime-only people. Sure, I knew it was coming in MHA, but I still cried when Uravity stood on top of UA High and yelled at everybody to let Deku back in. Anime hits different. But in order for you, and possibly for me, to understand the level of emotions that we're going to be going through throughout the duration of this arc, it's best to go into this arc with as good an understanding of the power systems, the people, and the situations they're in as possible. And thus, before we actually head into the Shibuya arc itself, we're going to be heading backwards a little bit. If you'll remember, people like Gojo have been suspicious that there is a mole within the Jujutsu Society for a long time, as people like Mahito and Geto have seemed to have too much information about the movements of Jujutsu sorcerers, as they knew how to get places like the Room of Stars to steal the Curse Womb paintings, which will require that they have a somewhat functional understanding of the barrier system around Jujutsu High, where certain sorcerers would be and when, and how best to navigate the complicated labyrinth that Tengen set up to protect all of the cursed objects stored under Jujutsu High. And thus, the Shibuya arc opens with Yuji going to try and find the mole, whose identity I'm not going to reveal because spoilers, but what you do need to know is that this mole has a binding vow with Mahito and Geto, with the binding vow saying that in exchange for giving information to Mahito and Geto, that Mahito will use his idol transfiguration to heal their body. Now, the reason that I'm bringing this up in the first place is because the concept of a binding vow is somewhat complicated to a couple of people. See, binding vows are a thing that you hear about pretty often in the JJK universe, and there's 2 types of binding vows. There are binding vows with oneself. The best example of this would be Nanami's overtime, that state between the hours of 9 and 5, he'll only use between 80 and 90% of his cursed energy, and the trade-off for this is that after 5 p.m. he'll be able to use 110 to 120% of his cursed energy. And the second, much more common type of binding vow, binding vows between two different people. Now, the best and most commonly seen example of a binding vow between two people is Yuji and Sukuna's binding vow. Now, this vow came up after Yuji's death, at which point Sukuna stated that he would bring Yuji back to life if Yuji agreed to entering in a binding vow with him. And this binding vow states that Sukuna is able to take over Yuji's body for 1 minute, whatever he says in chain. However, the counter argument from Yuji was that during this 1 minute, Sukuna wouldn't be able to hurt anybody, Yuji not included. So the mole in the Jujutsu Society and Mahito and Geto have a binding vow that neither of them are able to break, because if somebody breaks a binding vow between two people, it's pretty much considered to be instant death. So if you break a vow with yourself, the consequences are you lose what was ever gained by making that vow in the first place. So if Nanami used 100% of his cursed energy at 12:30 p.m., he just wouldn't be able to use 110 to 120% of his cursed energy at 5:30 p.m. However, the consequences of breaking a binding vow between two people are considered much worse. So the consequences are never penned out for us. All we know, however, is that people like Mahito and Geto don't even dare to break a binding vow with other people because of the possibility of consequences incurred. On top of this, Mahito and Geto are doing more than just compiling information about the Jujutsu Society that they can use to be at places at advantageous times. Mahito and Geto are also trying to create a screen, specifically a screen with a set amount of rules. Now, a screen is something that either jujutsu sorcerers or assistant managers will set up to make sure that people can't see the big old jujutsu sorcery fight between cursed spirits and jujutsu sorcerers, in order to keep the existence of jujutsu sorcery to a minimum. However, Mahito and Geto want a screen that does more than just make sure people can't see in. See, Mahito and Geto are trying to make a screen that won't allow civilians to leave. And on top of not allowing civilians to leave, the screen will also allow for no communication within the screen or from within the screen to outside of the screen. So a barrier to hold civilians in and to cut off all telecommunications. And the reason that they want to perfect a screen like this is so that they can use it in Shibuya, specifically Shibuya on Halloween, when it'll be its fullest and its most teeming with cursed energy. Because the more people, the more cursed energy, especially when there's a big old jujutsu sorcery fight going on around them that they can do nothing about. And the more the cursed energy, the better for Geto later on, and I'll explain that in a second. Another purpose of the screen is to separate Gojo from all other jujutsu sorcerers, as Geto and Mahito want Gojo sent into this screen in Shibuya by himself. Now, I'm not going to say why or what happens, but I'll tell you a couple of things that you need to know to best understand the fights that Gojo and other sorcerers go through within this screen or outside of it. See, within the confines of this screen, there is a battle between Gojo and a couple of high-grade cursed spirits, and these high-grade cursed spirits use something known as domain amplification. Now, domain amplification is very similar to a simple domain, in that it works by the user stretching their domain thinly across their entire body. Well, a simple domain is usually more of a circle. But in essence, a simple domain and domain amplification work in the exact same way, by stretching your domain outside of the confines of your body. And mind you, your domain is kind of just your consciousness, but manifested through the ability of cursed energy. And thus, by stretching your domain across your entire body, you're able to accomplish a couple of things. See, the reason that I say that domain amplification is similar to that of a simple domain is because, just like a simple domain, domain amplification also nullifies the sure hit factor of a domain expansion, which means if you had the grave misfortune of being caught up in something like Sukuna's malevolent shrine, if you amplified your domain, there would be no sure hit mechanic to either his cleave or dismantle, which would mean he would have to target you specifically. Okay, then why would two techniques that operate in the exact same capacity exist? If somebody wanted to use simple domain, they could use domain amplification and vice versa, right? Well, yes, within the confines of a domain expansion, they do operate exactly the same. However, the way that a simple domain and a domain amplification separate from each other is the shape. Remember, a simple domain is usually a circle, whether it be the wicker basket technique or just the straight up simple domain, which means that you create a domain around your entire body, usually that you can't reach, which means your domain is outside of the capacity of your reach. A domain amplification follows you as you move, which means every punch or kick that you deliver technically delivers your domain. Now, this is important for a couple of reasons. See, a domain actually nullifies cursed technique. This is why having a simple domain or an amplified domain nullifies the sure hit effect of a domain expansion. And thus, if you amplify your domain and punch something like a jujutsu technique, it should nullify said jujutsu technique. And the cursed spirits that are battling against Gojo use this against him because of his infinity. See, Gojo is constantly covered in infinity, which makes him impossible to hit. However, if you amplify your domain, you can punch through curse technique, thus nullifying the ability of infinity. Which, oh my god, that sounds terrible. Gojo's gonna get defeated so easily if infinity is gone. A large amount of his kit is heavily reliant on the fact that he has infinity. However, there are some drawbacks to amplifying your domain. See, much in the same capacity that while you're using your domain expansion, you can't use other curse techniques. While you're amplifying your own domain, you can't use your innate techniques, which means that anybody amplifying their domain can only use close quarter combat. And thus, if you want to amplify your domain to punch through infinity, you can only punch. Thus, the only way to beat Gojo's infinity is through a brawl. Now, the reason that this works is because by amplifying your domain, you're essentially creating an empty domain. And when this empty domain makes contact with a curse technique, the curse technique is sucked into the empty domain and therefore nullified. Kind of like punching with an empty fishbowl, and the empty fishbowl sucks in the curse technique, therefore allowing you to blast through, well, at least the infinity in this circumstance. But enough about that. There's also other things that you need to understand as they regard to Gojo in the Shibuya arc. See, if you're paying close attention in the early parts of JJK, you'll know that Geto specified that there would be something going down in Shibuya on October 31st. And on this date, October 31st, Gojo would be sealed, as Geto fully acknowledged the fact that Gojo was too strong to be defeated and therefore would need to be sealed. Now, the plan to seal Gojo revolves around an object known as the Prison Realm. Now, the Prison Realm is a special grade cursed object. It's said to be the last vestiges of a Buddha by the name of Genshin. I don't know if Genshin Impact is named after him. It's a possibility it is. Now, Genshin is a Buddhist monk that lived during the 10th and 11th centuries, also known as the Heian period in Japan, the golden age of jujitsu. And Genshin is very much a real-life Buddhist monk. He's like the grandfather of Pure Land's ideology. Within Buddhism, he's very important. However, the Prison Realm doesn't just operate like a Pokeball. You can't just throw it at Gojo and have him be sealed. There are rules to activating the Prison Realm, and those rules differ on who you're trying to seal in the realm. That is to say that it gets harder to seal somebody in the Prison Realm the stronger that they are. And thus, sealing Gojo in the Prison Realm is a task. See, the activation clauses for Gojo require that he stand within a 4-meter perimeter for 1 minute in his own brain. That's kind of complicated, so let me go over it in a more long-winded way. Essentially, Gojo has to be within 4 meters of the Prison Realm for a minute, but not a minute of real-world time. And this is a common misconception, and it's why I'm going over this. Because the concept of Gojo standing within a 4-meter radius of a big old Prison Realm monster thing for an entire minute seems kind of ridiculous. And while you might think that,
oh, somebody could just hold him down there for a minute or trick him into standing next to it for a minute,
neither of those are massive possibilities. But it's not a real-world minute. See, this is the key difference here. See, Gojo has to stand within this 4-meter perimeter of the Prison Realm for a minute in his mind. So let's say, hypothetically, I threw the Prison Realm at Gojo, and he saw it was me. And me and Gojo had been on a couple of steamy dates 2 years ago, and when he saw me, he remembered all of those dates. As long as the time that he's thinking about me is longer than a minute, and that is to say the time elapsed in which he knew me. Not like standing there and thinking about me for a minute, but if you thought about like April of 2022 to December of 2022, that would be him thinking about a time period much longer than a minute. And since he was thinking about a time period longer than a minute, he would be sealed in said Prison Realm. So while it's not easy to seal Gojo, it's also not impossible. Now, what if hypothetically Gojo were to be sealed in the Prison Realm? Is there a way out of the Prison Realm? What is the Prison Realm really? Well, like we already said, it's a special grade cursed object created from a Buddhist monk. But more than that, it's a tiny little cube that fits in your hand and holds a pocket dimension. A pocket dimension where only one person fits and time doesn't elapse. And there's actually technically 2 pieces to this Prison Realm. There's a front gate and a back gate. Now, the front gate is the part used to catch people, and the back gate is kind of the exit. It's actually technically unclear whether or not the back gate could be used to catch people as well. I know I catch people with, I'm not going to finish that sentence. Now, the back gate was hidden by Tengen hundreds of years ago, because mind you, Tengen's been around for a long time, and therefore they could get their hands on special grade cursed objects really whenever they want. And because of the sheer power of the Prison Realm, Tengen wanted to make sure that it would never fall into the wrong hands, and thus Tengen sealed away the back gate of the Prison Realm. So I know what you're saying.
Well, Nick, if you just add the back gate to the front gate, can who's ever trapped in the front gate just slither on out of the back?
No, actually. See, while Tengen hoped that hiding away the back gate would make it so no one ever went looking for the Prison Realm, Geto found it overseas. So genuinely, what is the purpose of the back gate then? Well, you still do need the back gate to get who's ever out of the front gate out of the front gate. However, the only person who's allowed to release people from the front gate is the person who sealed said person in the front gate. So if hypothetically I was sealed away in the prison realm by Geto, the only person who could release me from the front gate would be Geto. Unless, of course, you had the back gate. See, because if you have the back gate and you connect it to the front gate, you can get someone out, but not because you added the two pieces together. See, you can get people out of the front gate by adding the back gate if and only if you have somebody with the ability to destroy cursed techniques or cursed objects. And once you connect the front gate and the back gate together and use a cursed technique to destroy the cursed object that is the front gate, the person will be released from the back gate. And that's how the prison realm works. But enough about dusty old monks and their prisons, let's talk about dusty old curse users. Because during the Shibuya incident, you're going to be introduced to the dustiest of the cursed users, Kenjaku. Now, I'm hoping that my editor won't use any imagery that would directly spoil who Kenjaku actually is, but if he does, that's on him and not me. See, the reason that I want to introduce you to Kenjaku is not only because it's the first time that we see his innate technique during this arc, but also because he becomes pretty much the main antagonist of the story after the Shibuya incident, and therefore understanding not only how his abilities work, but also how he plays into the greater scheme of the JJK storyline is very important. So Kenjaku is a sorcerer who's been alive for at least 400 years. Now, the reason that we say at least 400 years is because we don't technically know how long Kenjaku's been alive. What we do know is that 400 years ago, Kenjaku was talking to Hajime Kashimo, who was the most powerful jujutsu sorcerer of his time 400 years ago, for something called the Culling Game, which happens after the Shibuya incident, which we're not going to talk about. We'll do everything you need to know about the Culling Game when that comes up in like 2 years. What you do need to know, though, is that even though we don't know how long Kenjaku's been around, we do know that he's had his finger in many pies. See, the reason that Kenjaku was able to be around for so long is because he's kind of immortal. See, Kenjaku's innate ability is something lovingly known by fans as Brain Kun, and that's because we don't actually have a name for the innate technique. But this technique allows Kenjaku to place his brain in somebody else's body and take over said body. And after taking over their body, Kenjaku gets said person's cursed energy, innate techniques, and memories, and therefore has been able to live for probably more than 1,000 years by constantly switching bodies. And therefore, Kenjaku has been an incredibly important person in almost the entirety of Japan's jujutsu history. What's wilder about all of this is that every single body that Kenjaku switches into technically makes him stronger. As let's say I have a cursed technique and Kenjaku takes over my body for a decade or so. After Kenjaku has used up my body for all that it's worth and switched it to somebody else, he takes my cursed technique with him, which kind of makes Kenjaku a stockpiler of innate techniques. However, there is kind of a soft limit to this. See, there's a limit to how much Kenjaku's brain can actually process before it overloads. And since the usage of innate techniques is very much tied to your brain, this was actually just confirmed in Sukuna and Gojo's battle, Kenjaku has to kind of pick and choose with the techniques that he wants to keep from body to body. So to say that Kenjaku has a full 1,000 years of innate techniques stored in his brain is a stretch. But to say that he kept the greatest hits of all the bodies he's ever inhabited, probably fair. Now, we technically know 4 of Kenjaku's bodies. 2 of them are spoilers, so we'll talk about the other 2. We know the body that Kenjaku used to conversate with Kashimo. That's basically all we know about that body, is that at one point he was using it to talk to Kashimo. We don't know the innate techniques, the cursed energy, the memories, nothing. The other body that we know of from Kenjaku is Noritoshi Kamo. Now, Noritoshi Kamo is known as the most evil sorcerer in history, a stain on the Kamo name, which, mind you, is one of the most prestigious jujutsu sorcerer families out there. Remember the guy whose eyes are always closed from the Kyoto Jujutsu High that uses blood manipulation? He's from the Kamo family. Now, Noritoshi Kamo was responsible for a lot of bad things, but the most important thing that he was remembered for was the creation of the 9 cursed womb paintings. Now, these cursed womb paintings came about when a woman accidentally had a half-cursed spirit, half-human baby. This woman was driven out of her village because everyone was like, "Did you bang a cursed spirit?" And unfortunately, she ended up right in Noritoshi Kamo's hands, who then proceeded to knock her up and then force her to have 9 abortions, all of which became the cursed womb paintings. And these cursed womb paintings were all half cursed spirit, half human. Now, we've seen 2 of these cursed womb paintings at the end of season 1 when Yuji and Nobara killed them both. And as we know, they're incredibly powerful. However, their power slightly pales in comparison to their 3rd and final living brother, because as we know, Mahito is only able to steal numbers 1 through 3 from the Room of Stars, I believe it's called, the place where JJK High stores all of its special grade cursed objects. And these 3 cursed paintings were given shape and soul by Mahito using his idol transfiguration. Now, the reason that I'm talking about these paintings paintings is because the third and final Death Womb painting, Choso, is a main player in the Shibuya incident, and he, like the Kamos before him, has the blood manipulation ability, which all of the Curse Womb paintings have to a degree, which makes sense when you consider the fact that they were created by Noritoshi Kamo, who prior to being taken over by Kenjaku had the blood manipulation ability, since he was a member of the Kamo family. Now, a bunch of fun stuff happens with Choso. I'm not going to get into it because, once again, spoilers, but it's important for you to understand Kenjaku's importance in this arc and the JJK greater history, as well as understanding how the Curse Womb paintings came about. But enough about that old man, let's go to an old woman, who I guess is young in comparison to Kenjaku. In this arc, there is another minor antagonist who goes by the name of Ogami. Now, Ogami works side by side with a man by the name of Asakawa, but we're not going to talk about him because he's not all that interesting. See, Ogami has a very interesting ability. She has a seance technique. See, Ogami has the ability to summon the body or soul information of any deceased person, simply by using either their corpse or a part of their corpse, which allows Ogami to shift herself or any willing participant into the person that she is seancing back to the world. Now, the reason that I made sure to differentiate between body and soul information is because Ogami has to differentiate between body and soul information. See, let's say hypothetically, I died, and Ogami either got my entire corpse or just my hand or something. She would be able to use the flesh of my corpse to seance herself into either my body or bring back not only my body, but my soul. That is to say, let's say I'm stronger than Ogami, which I would hope that I am. She's an 87-year-old woman. She could bring back my body and then could go do a bunch of things with my body that I would never do, like punt a baby seal. However, if she brought back my soul as well, she'd essentially be bringing me back to life. So I wouldn't do anything that I wouldn't do while I was alive, which is substantially less useful for somebody trying to use your body for nefarious means. Because the reason that Ogami is siding with Mahito and Geto is because after Gojo was born, it was pretty much impossible to do crime anymore, and Ogami made a living off crime, and therefore Ogami, whenever she uses her seance technique, only brings back bodies, not souls. Incredibly powerful bodies that she can use to commit nefarious deeds. But Ogami isn't the only character that you're going to meet. You're also going to meet some of the key players from the Zenin clan. Specifically, you're going to meet a character by the name of Naobita. And Naobita is not only an old man from the Zenin clan, but the 26th head of the clan. He's a special grade 1 jujutsu sorcerer. He's very powerful. Now, it's not entirely clear whether or not special grade 1 is better than grade 1, because the only people that we've ever seen hold the title of special grade 1 were all members of the Zenin clan, so we don't know if this is because they're stronger than grade 1 sorcerers, but not as strong as special grade sorcerers, or because they're grade 1 sorcerers from one of the jujutsu sorcery royal families. All that matters is that Naobito is very powerful, and a lot of Naobito's abilities come from his innate technique, an innate technique that is very popular amongst the Zenin clan, and therefore Naobito isn't the only person you're going to see using this technique, and therefore understanding this technique is very important. Naobito and a couple of other Zenin have the ability known as projection sorcery, and this is one of the most complicated abilities in all of JJK, so strap in. See, projection sorcery allows the user to split 1 second into 24 frames, like 24 FPS on a computer or TV. Now, for those of you who played Fortnite on console when it first came out, you'll understand that 30 FPS isn't terrible. In fact, the human eye interacts with the world at around 30 FPS. Now, everything within Naobito's field of vision is affected by his projection sorcery, so everything that you can hypothetically see from the corner of your eyes to the center of your vision is affected by the projection sorcery that you would be using in this circumstance, which means that anything that Naobito can see when he touches it has to abide by this 24 FPS rule. But how do you abide by a 24 FPS rule? Well, let's say hypothetically Naobito touches you with his palm, and you are now under the effect of the 24 FPS rule. Every frame within that second, you are allowed a specific movement, and Naobito is held to this same thing, which means when Naobito is using his projection sorcery, he has to move 24 predetermined times every second, which makes him appear as though he's going incredibly fast. However, if let's say hypothetically you only move 23 times in that set second, or if you move 25 times in that set second, if you just stray from 24 FPS at all, you will be trapped inside of an animation frame for a second, at which point Naobito can pick you up and shatter you out of the animation frame, landing an unguarded blow against you. Therefore, this ability makes it that any person battling against Naobito is forced to keep up with his speed. And if you fall behind or go ahead of his speed whatsoever, you get frozen for a second, so Naobito can just smash you with an attack. It's kind of complicated, and we never super get the whole logistic rundown on how you move 24 times in a second. But just think of it as needing to make a predetermined move 24 times every second, and if you don't do that, you get frozen for a second. And like I said, this technique comes up a lot, so understanding that is pretty important. And speaking of things that come up a lot, the last thing that we need to cover is Mahoraga. Now, for anime-only people out there, we've only ever heard Megami talk about Mahoraga, though Mahoraga has been summoned in the manga many times. But since the Ten Shadow technique is very important to the greater fold of JJK, and Mahoraga is almost always threatened to come out, understanding why Mahoraga is such a danger and how it plays into the Ten Shadow technique is very important. So, Mahoraga, also known as Eight-Handled Divine General Mahoraga, is the strongest cursed spirit that belongs to the Ten Shadows technique, and by a long shot. In fact, Sukuna believes that if Megami had summoned Mahoraga the first time that Sukuna met Megami, that Mahoraga would have killed him. However, Mahoraga isn't controlled by Megami and has never been controlled by any user of the Ten Shadows technique ever. And this is because of the way that the Ten Shadows technique works. See, in order to get all 10 shadows of the Ten Shadows technique, the Ten Shadows technique user has to exercise the 10 shadows they want to use. Now, each of these 10 shadows are just Shikigami, and therefore, in order to complete the roster of the 10 shadows, the 10 shadows user in question has to exercise 10 Shikigami. Now, 10 shadows users start with the 2 wolves that Megami uses all of the time, and then as they grow older, they use these 2 wolves to help them exercise more and more Shikigami until eventually all 10, or in the case of every 10 shadows user ever, 9. Because, like I said previously, no 10 shadows user has ever been able to exercise the 10th shadow, Mahoraga. However, this doesn't mean that Mahoraga cannot be summoned. See, Mahoraga can be summoned and is summoned quite often, but the capacity in which Mahoraga is summoned isn't a capacity that's useful to the 10 shadows user. It's kind of a I'm gonna die so you die situation. See, you can summon Mahoraga. However, if you're summoning Mahoraga, you're summoning it to exercise it, which means that once you summon Mahoraga, you're entering into combat against it. However, the only way to truly control Mahoraga is to defeat it in one-on-one combat. But if hypothetically you summon it in the middle of a battle you believe that you're gonna lose, you tie not only yourself but the person you were battling into this exercising rite, which means that Mahoraga will kill you both. And even if, hypothetically, you and this other person manage to kill Mahoraga, you will not be in control of Mahoraga because it wasn't a one-on-one. But why is Mahoraga so powerful? Well, Mahoraga has the ability to adapt. And by adapt, I mean Mahoraga has the ability to nullify any attack that you use so long as you try to use it a set amount of times. See, let's say hypothetically you are fortunate enough to kill Mahoraga. Let's say I pull out the Glock no Jutsu and put a bullet in its head. Sure, Mahoraga might have died in that one moment, but when Mahoraga comes back to life, it will be immune to all bullets. And this is a little thing called the burden of adaptation. See, the reason that Mahoraga is referred to as the 8-handled divine general Mahoraga is because Mahoraga has an 8-handled wheel on its back. And when Mahoraga is adapting to something, those handles will spin. But this handle doesn't actually always have to be on Mahoraga. If hypothetically you managed to rip this wheel off Mahoraga's back and shoved it into my back, and then somebody killed me with the Glock no Jutsu, Mahoraga would become immune to bullets, but wouldn't have to die to them.
But okay, Nick, that ability doesn't sound that strong. I mean, how many times do you need to kill Mahoraga? You kill him once with a strong ability, you don't have to worry about him coming back.
Well, not true, because he always comes back. That's actually his whole thing. But also because he doesn't need to die to an ability to adapt to it. This is relatively new information, actually. See, as of me recording this video, which is August 21st, 2023, it's still kind of up in the air how this ability works, but I'm gonna give you my best shot at it currently. See, we now kind of know if Mahoraga or somebody bearing the burden of adaptation is hit by an ability 4 times, Mahoraga adapts to it. Now, we're not entirely sure whether or not you need to be hit by an ability 4 times, or if it's just hit him with an ability once and give him enough time to adapt to it, but my current theory is that he needs to be hit by it 4 times. Which means if hypothetically you hit Mahoraga with your strongest attack 4 times and he still doesn't die, your strongest attack does nothing now. Not to mention that Mahoraga is also a master of positive cursed energy, because let's say hypothetically I pull out the Glock no Jutsu once again and I almost fatally injure Mahoraga. So long as Mahoraga heals and manages to heal 3 more times from the Glock no Jutsu, he will now be immune to bullets. And since that was my strongest ability, I now have to find a different way to kill Mahoraga. Not to mention Mahoraga also has a sword, which is imbued with positive energy, which means it destroys all cursed techniques and cursed objects. So regardless of what you throw at Mahoraga, he can just stab it with a sword and it's gone. And we've seen this work at the highest possible level. So it's kind of a nightmare matchup for anyone, which is why no 10 Shadows user has ever defeated it in one-on-one combat. Which is kind of crazy when you consider the fact that Gojo said at one point or another there was a 10 Shadows user who was stronger than a wielder of the 6 Eyes and the Limitless. And Gojo could definitely kill Mahoraga. And yeah, that's everything that you need to know about the Shibuya incident. I mean, there's a lot more I could tell you, but that would be heading into spoiler territory. But there could definitely be things that I missed. So as we head headlong into this dark and dreary arc, guys, if there's anything that confuses you, ask me. And then I can do everything you needed to know about the Shibuya incident, very much spoilers included video where we get, you know, deeper into the weeds. But if you're excited for this new season of JJK, tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Megami facing the smallest inconvenience. Well, time for Mahoraga